A couple of decades ago, an actor had an HBO special where he went around to a college and explained to students that in today's history, many legends were printed instead of the fact because they were better stories. Everyone knows the story of Paul Revere if you live in the United States. It's etched into our history. It's taught from the earliest grade school you can probably remember. You probably heard it in first grade or even earlier. But the man who actually did the ride from Boston to Philadelphia over 4 days without sleeping and going through 3 horses, I believe, was named Israel Bissell. And the only monument to this man is a small stone and plaque outside of Philadelphia along the trail route that he took. So why do we celebrate Paul Revere and have never even heard of Israel Bissell? Because Paul Revere rhymed better in a poem that was written years later. The story was catchier, the legend became fact, and the truth was left behind. Video game history has been doing this exact same thing. When I talked about Castlevania II Simon's Quest, the legend says it's a broken, confusing mess, but the reality is much more nuanced. Today, I'm going to do that same kind of look at another game, which has fallen bigger prey to printing the legend. It's been defined not by what it actually is, but by what the collective frustration of a few very loud voices that hardened it into fact over the last 30 years. To understand why this game is so misunderstood, you have to understand the year 1987. The rule of video game sequels wasn't written yet. There was no rule stating the Zelda sequel had to be a top-down game. Nintendo was experimenting with all of their franchises at this point. Whether they made it to actual cartridge or release is another story. All of their franchises at this point were under this lens of shaking things up or changing direction or doing something that they wanted to originally but didn't, and now they feel they could. But there was another reason that all of this was happening at Nintendo, and it's because Japan was in the midst of a very large cultural shift with the release of the game Dragon Quest, arguably the largest franchise in the country even to this day. RPGs suddenly were the hottest thing on the planet. Everyone wanted experience points, leveling up, and talking to villagers. Miyamoto saw this wave incoming, and he decided that Hyrule would be the game that they would try out this RPG archetype. The original Zelda was about pure, unguided exploration, a straight-up adventure game with some RPG elements. But Zelda II, it is a straight action RPG. Of course, in the Overworld, they kept the top-down look, but it was really just a glorified stage select menu. You couldn't even look at your inventory on the Overworld map. And it was definitely very jarring at first, as people were expecting more of what Zelda 1 had brought in a grander scale. And what we got was anything but. Nintendo was trying to capture the depth of a PC-quality RPG with one of their at-home franchises as an action RPG. And to pull that off, they needed a totally different engine. And this is where the story kind of gets more interesting, because Zelda 2 shares some DNA with a very large Nintendo giant. In the side-scrolling segments of Zelda 2, have you ever noticed that Link moves a bit differently than other platformers at the time? He kind of has more glide to his step. His jumps are more floaty, because when you look back at games like the original Castlevania, and to follow later the third Castlevania and Ninja Gaiden, this was a very different game for how Link moved versus those characters, where when you made those jumps in Castlevania and Ninja Gaiden, you were committed. If you started it wrong, it's going to end wrong. There was no course correction. Link, on the other hand, has kind of a float to him, a momentum. When he lands, he doesn't just stop instantly, he moves a few pixels forward, as if he's getting his step and balance back. And that's because Zelda 2 isn't just a sequel to the original Zelda game. Mathematically, it's a sibling to the original Super Mario Bros. See, Zelda 2 was programmed by a company called SRD, which Nintendo would go on to completely acquire in 2022. SRD was a huge part of the development of the original Super Mario Bros. And Zelda 2. In fact, the main programmer on both games was Nakago Toshihiko. When the team decided to make Zelda a side-scroller, they essentially took the athletic engine that they built for Mario and moved it over to Hyrule. And it wasn't just that momentum system, the inertia that Link has that he shares with Mario. There were graphical elements that shared common artwork between the two, because we're talking about the same development house here. Look at the elevators in all of the palaces. They look very, very close to the moving platforms that we saw in the Mushroom Kingdom. You can also see this same kind of carryover with the clouds. Famously, in Super Mario Bros., the clouds are also the bushes, and that was to save on limited memory. A similar thing is done here in Zelda II, where if you take a look at the clouds, they share a very interestingly similar look to Super Mario Bros. Now, this connection is vital. The reason platforming in Zelda II feels so much more fluid than its contemporaries is that it's built on the most proven platforming codebase in history. It's why the combat also feels so kinetic. You aren't fighting the controls, you're fighting the enemies. Most of the time. You attack them, if they block, you're going to bounce backwards a bit, they're going to bounce backwards a bit. You need to realign yourself and re-engage. Blocking in this game really had an impact, whereas in other games you still would just either take damage and stand still, or take damage and the game would have a predetermined motion for the character that took a hit. Again, take for example Castlevania. You get hit, you get that notorious knockback. But there's no real difference from the knockback from a Medusa head versus the knockback from an Axe Knight. It's the same knockback, unless you hit a wall. But if you're going to land in a pit, it's the same arc. Now, it sounds a lot like I'm just glorifying the game, but I'm not delusional. If you played this game as a kid, especially when it released like I did, you probably hated it. And that's okay. I think it's safe to say that most people were not expecting Zelda 2 to be what it was when we first turned it on. Also, most of us probably never looked at the map unless we had a really long car ride home from the store that we bought it from, or our parents took us to go shopping and it was read the instruction book a few times, look at the map, read the back of the box, and then do it all over again until you got home. The presentation of the game obviously is radically different. And notorious to the era, the hints from the villagers are horrible because they're poorly translated. I mean, let's be honest, a man that simply says, "I am error," is supposed to be some kind of clue. Obviously, there was some kind of programming error. No one gave a shit to fix it. So how is a kid in 1987 supposed to figure out where to go when villagers didn't give you the proper translation and there was no in-game map? Similar to what Castlevania 2 would do. However, that game, as far as its world, was significantly smaller than Zelda 2. In fact, I would argue there's probably a very large group of people out there that may have played this game and don't even realize that there's an Eastern Hyrule and an entire second continent. Yes, in this game, Hyrule was broken across 2 continents. And then there's the difficulty spikes. There's no getting around this one. The combat can be horribly unforgiving. The amount of resources for your resource management are few and far between. And some of the battle trials that you're put through, Death Valley, I'm looking at you. The Path to the Hammer at Death Mountain, I'm also looking at you. These were gauntlets that really tested your ability. Whereas in the original Zelda game, while it required a certain level of skill to get through it, it certainly didn't need anything like this game. The game also suffers from an identity crisis. It really wants to be an action RPG, and it's pretty committed with the experience points, a full magic system, leveling up, an inventory system. I mean, it's got pretty much everything one would expect in an RPG, minus equipment and weapons, where there's no upgrades for either of those in this game, unlike the original Zelda game, where you can at least get 2 new swords, you can get a newer shield or a larger shield, but for whatever reason, like Castlevania 2, it's stuck to lives. So you get 3 lives, just like in Castlevania 2. But if you die on that 3rd one, you get a screen that probably haunted kids for decades, from the late 80s and early 90s. It says, Ganon has returned, and it's just this picture of a shadowed pig Ganon, and he laughs at you with a red screen behind you. So it's like, congratulations, kid. Not only did you die because you suck, but you brought back Ganon and probably destroyed the world. But winner is you. But that wasn't the worst part about it. The worst part was that you lose all of your experience, just like you lose all your hearts in Castlevania 2. But unlike Castlevania 2, where when you started that continue, it's on that same screen where you died, nope, Zelda 2 sends you all the way back to the North Palace, where Zelda is nice and sleeping. So if you were on Eastern Hyrule, you now have to trek all the way back through Western Hyrule, take the raft over to Eastern Hyrule, and then go through all the areas that you were in before to get back to where you were. And in doing that, by the time you get to Death Valley, yeah, there's a lot of just obnoxious combat sequences to go through that are just mandatory. You can end up getting back to where you were on 0 lives again. Also, like Castlevania 2, however, at least you kept your upgrades. You kept your level, of which you can get to level 8, leveling your attack to level 8, your magic to level 8, and your health to level 8. And like the first Zelda game, there are heart containers that you can find that will increase your life bar, and magic containers, which would come later, that increase your magic bar. And just like its new contemporary RPG cousin, this game requires you to grind. If anyone's played Dragon Quest, you know that it's a requirement in almost every one of these games to spend hours grinding experience to be the appropriate level for the boss that you're going to go up against. This game really is no different unless you've completely memorized and mastered the combat or you're a speedrunner. But the average player, especially one that's having a hard time, yeah, you're going to spend a few hours grinding to get to level 8 of all 3 of those categories. But the amount of experience you get versus what you need to level up, it's not a great ratio. Sometimes you get lucky and an enemy will drop an experience boost, a little P bag, because they didn't call it experience, they called it points. Some of those bags would give you 50 points, some of them would give you 200 points. These are great boons. When you get to Eastern Hyrule, though, the average enemy is going to give you 50 experience. And in order to get from level 7 to level 8 for your third and final stat, it is 9,000 experience. So we're talking a lot of time is required to do this. To which I can say, in the footage I'll be putting with this, you will definitely see that at one point I'm level like 4 attack, 5 health, 5 magic, and then the next, I'm level 8 in all of them. I didn't cheat. I spent probably 3 or 4 hours just straight grinding. Yeah, I'm not the best at this game. I will also admit I never beat this game as a kid, not until I was an adult. Although, I still loved this game as a kid, just like I loved Castlevania 2. Except we never figured out how to beat this one. Actually, I think most of us just got so frustrated that we never even bothered trying to beat it anymore. We just kind of went around and just went through the combat sequences, really. Because there's a couple of dungeons. Yeah, you know what? No, there's 2 dungeons that are incredibly cryptic to find. They're straight up hidden. Kind of like in the original Zelda, you have to burn the bush down to get to level 7. Think of that, but like on crack, because this game gives you nothing when you're on the world map. In fact, when you hit A, you'll eventually get a flute. Hitting B plays the flute. Hitting A uses the hammer to destroy boulders. Now that's pretty obvious when you get the hammer. The flute, on the other hand, there's like one instance where you use it outside to basically move a Snorlax. It's probably where they got the idea from, to be perfectly honest. But there's a dungeon that you need to stand in a specific spot on the map and play the flute to make it appear. No kid was going to think of that.
Shit.
Not without a strategy guide, or an older sibling that was playing the game more than them and had more patience. Or time. Patience. And then there's a hidden town that is absolutely also required to beat the game for what's given there. That's hidden in a forest. But the game has never told you that you can destroy trees with a hammer, because really, does that... I mean, yeah, we have Minecraft now, but this is 1987. You wouldn't think a game that gave you a hammer that destroys boulders is going to destroy trees. No, you have to go into a forest, and on a specific square of trees, you had to use the hammer to make a town appear. Yeah. Years later, when I found out that's where that town moved to, I was like, I never would have thought of that. I still wouldn't have thought of that. It still doesn't make any sense now. It would have made more sense with the fucking candle to light the trees on fire and burn them down. Town revealed. Great. You may burn the town down, but I have to imagine if Link felled an entire acre of forest with a hammer, he probably killed a few people by accident too. Or not by accident. Anyway, so why put up with all of this? Because it sounds incredibly frustrating. It's because the combat's actually a lot of fun in this. I don't know how strong or how heavily weighed my opinion is in terms of the thought process on this, but I actually really enjoyed the battle sequences in this game. Some of them, are just straight up designed to brutally wipe you out. Like, there's no getting around that. It's just... You die a lot in this game. But once you finally get, like, a grip on each enemy's attack patterns and how to attack them, it becomes really fun and very rewarding. It's almost like a Dark Souls game nearly 30 years before Dark Souls was created, where just figuring out an enemy's pattern and weaknesses felt incredibly rewarding when you finally got that payoff with the kill. There's no parrying in this game, but there is a high and low block mechanic, and a lot of people actually don't even understand that, again, to this day. When Link is standing or attacking, he can block. Now, you can't block every projectile in the game, but you can block most of them, including certain magic. Now, when enemies are attacking, you'll see that they're attacking high or they're attacking low, and the game telegraphs this. And they're telegraphing it so that you can be prepared for that. The idea is supposed to be, if they're attacking low, you want to attack high before their attack animation goes off. Because one of two things will happen if you don't. You both hit each other, and you get repelled, and you still lose life, and then you have to realign yourselves, because like I said, with the inertia, you push each other off when you're blocking. Or, they're going to attack faster, you're going to take damage, you're going to have to realign yourself. So once you get the timing and you figure all of this out, it actually makes the combat a lot more fun and much easier to stomach. The only thing that never improves, however, is the fact that they somehow call Link's sword a sword. I mean, this thing is like it's smaller than Grant Dynasty's dagger from Castlevania 3. Like, it's so small. Like, you have to be standing on top of an enemy to attack them. And their weapons are definitely longer than yours, or they're ranged weapons. Nope, I gotta stand in your face so that I can hit you with my tiny skewer. I really don't know if that was like a design choice, or if that was a limitation of the system to, like, the sprite couldn't be any bigger than that because of whatever reason. But whoever decided that that sword was going to be smaller than Rambo's knife, I don't like that person. But as you progress through the game, you're actually going to get a couple more sword techniques: the downward thrust and the upward thrust. Now, the downward thrust, funny enough, is actually going to be used a lot more for travel once you get it, because if you do get into a combat sequence and you're low on life, or you just really don't want to battle at that point, you can just pogo stick off of every enemy's head. Just jump, hold down. I mean, time the jump properly. If you jump into them, you're not going to bounce off them. You're just going to hit them and take damage. I've done it more times than I can count, but I've gotten better at it. But you can just pogo stick, boop, right off of their heads, leave the scene. You're not committed to those battles, just like in most Japanese RPGs. There's the option to run from battle. Sometimes it doesn't work. But in this, if you just walk off the left or right screen, you're out. They can make it difficult to get out without killing everything or dodging projectiles that sometimes can be blocked and sometimes can't, but you can just leave battle. Similar to the original Zelda game, each dungeon is going to reward you with an item that is necessary to progress throughout the rest of the game. However, unlike future installments in the franchise, the items don't just have a quick little gimmick. They're typically useful throughout the duration of the game. For instance, the very first item you're going to get is a candle. Sounds pretty innocuous. In the first game, there were 2 different candles, one that you can use once per screen and one that you can use unlimited times per screen. You could burn down bushes, you could reveal secret areas, and eventually a dungeon. In this game, it actually lights caves. If you go into a cave in this game, they are pitch black. They look very much like World 2 and the underground levels from Super Mario Bros. There's that connection again. You can sometimes see the walking enemies' feet on the bottom because the pixels of their art cutout go in between the little gaps, but that's only going to help you with walking enemies. Flying enemies, there's no way to detect them. So once you get the candle, every cave you go into now is lit. No more hiding anything. And that's everywhere in the game. It's not like you get it in the first dungeon and then they make you walk through a cave and it's like, wow, I couldn't go through this cave before. Now I can. Hooray. Toss the candle. No, every cave throughout the rest of your journey is now lit because you have the candle. The hammer is used to break boulders and forests. But there's boulders blocking your way throughout the entire game. It's not just you get the hammer, you break a boulder to move to the next area and never use it again. Same thing with the magic. And the magic system in this game was pretty advanced, if you ask me. I mean, they really took the concept of magic from RPGs with mana bars and resource management, and I will say resources are very scarce in this game. In fact, there's no resource managing your health until you get the heal spell. Outside of that, and I'll get to it, are the villages. That was it for healing. Where was I? Magic. So, there's a jump spell. You do need it to get to the second dungeon, but you're going to need it a lot more throughout the rest of the game, whether it's finding an NPC in one of the towns that teaches you that upward thrust technique, who's in a hidden area that's only accessible with jumping, or there's going to be parts of dungeons that you cannot traverse unless you can jump high enough, or combat in some of the dungeons. I call them dungeons, but they're really palaces. I'm going to keep calling them dungeons. And there's 6 of them, by the way, plus the final one, for a grand total of 7. And the last one is just... it's something. So yeah, similar to the items that you get, the magic that you get is going to continue to be important throughout your entire journey. Whether it's being able to cast a fireball, whether it's jump, healing, shield, which doubles your defense, they all have uses throughout the entirety of the game. So you don't feel like you're just getting upgrades just to kind of move to the next segment and then never use that thing again. It all culminates up to the very end, and that last dungeon puts everything to the test. Your swordplay knowledge, your resource management, your spell use, and your item use. It's a hard last dungeon. And then there's 2 final bosses. That doesn't really make sense to say there's 2 final bosses, because final means final, but there's 2 final bosses in this dungeon. Unfortunately, however, this game was an evolutionary dead end for the franchise. Nintendo realized they pushed the RPG elements and the difficulty a bit too far. In fact, the director of the game recalled in an interview talking to a friend who said he gave up on the game because he simply couldn't beat Thunderbird, which is the first of the 2 final bosses. Which means the guy didn't even realize there was another boss fight after that one. The guy actually felt legitimately bad that he made the game so hard that even his friend who worked in the gaming industry and also produced and developed games could not beat that game. So Nintendo kind of got rid of a lot of that stuff. Some of it definitely moved on and carried over in other ways. In fact, a lot of the names of NPCs and towns that appear later in the series originated in this game. The first town you go to is named Raru, a character I wish that didn't exist in a game that I also wish didn't exist, but yeah, it started here in Zelda 2. There's Mito's Swamp, which we know Mito's going to be the asshole in Ocarina of Time. And with the exception of one town, which had a very traditional Japanese name, most of the other ones, in some fashion, made their way into future games. And what I thought was a nice little Easter egg was in Breath of the Wild, and I guess Tears of the Kingdom. When you looked at the map, a lot of these places are actual markers on that Hyrule. Now, it's kind of hard to say that Zelda 2 And any of the other games in this franchise share the same Hyrule because there's 2 continents in this one. I mean, yes, there's that whole ridiculous timeline that Nintendo came up with, and let's be honest, they only did that because people wouldn't stop trying to link the games together. But I think we all know at the end of the day that it's never really the same Link in Zelda unless it's explicitly said it's the same Link in Zelda. And that's fine with me. They don't have to be connected in this some grandiose way with 3 different timelines. Just, it's a, I don't know, different Link, different Zelda. Same Hyrule, but it's a different Hyrule. It's like the multiverse. Doesn't cheapen the games or the lore anymore. That's a whole separate thing. What I'm kind of really getting at here is that we did get Dark Link out of this game, though. That's that second final boss. You think you beat the game after you kill Thunderbird. You don't. You walk into the next screen, see a little gnome-looking guy holding the piece of Triforce you need, and then he fades away. Screen gets dark, and then your shadow pops out. Now you have to fight Shadow/Dark Link. Actually could be a pretty tough fight, especially after you just burn down all of your stamina. Mental stamina. There's no in-game stamina bar like Dark Souls. You have to fight another boss. Thankfully, you can kind of cheese him. You just kind of stand on the left side of the screen, just keep attacking up, and stupid-ass Dark Link just keeps walking towards you and tries attacking low. You just hit him in the face, and it gets pushed off and takes damage, and you take none. But if you don't know that cheese strat and you try fighting him legitimately, he's faster and he's going to read your moves better than you can read his. Yeah, I hate that fight. I hate doppelganger fights in general in games. It's like, you're me, but better than me, which means I suck, and that sucks. The villages. I did not talk about the villages. All right, so the villages. There are a few villages throughout the game. These are your hubs, to a degree. Each town has key elements in it. The first element is a healer. Second element is a magic healer, with the exception of the first town. The third is a side quest. It's not really a side quest, it's actually a required quest. The fourth thing is the wise man. There's a wise man in every town. Now, when you first go into town, there's NPCs walking around, and there's open doors on buildings. You can go into those open houses. Now, when you walk past certain houses, an NPC will come out of it. Now, that just wasn't a graphical flair. That's an NPC that you absolutely have to talk to. Now, the healer NPC does this same thing, walks out of the house sometimes, but the healer always has a red dress. The other NPC that walks out of the house will be different. Either a purple dress or a different NPC entirely. The healer is always the same character model. That other NPC is going to give you a side quest when you talk to them. When you complete that side quest, they invite you into their house, and then you go into their basement, and you find a whole bunch of dead people that they've been... No, there's a wise man down there that teaches you a spell. And again, these spells are basically required to get through the game. I mean, I guess you could argue that really just... All right, they're all necessary with the exception of shield and life. Technically, you don't need a self-healing spell. Technically, you don't need to double your defense. The other spells, though, you do need. So you have to find the wise man in every town you go to. The best part about this, though, is the flavor text and the insinuation. Because every healer, like I said, in every town, is the same female character. And she'll say, oh, come inside and I can heal you. Or come and rest here. And then, like, something afterwards, you see Link's life bar go up and it's like, revived, or, you know, I've healed your wounds. It's just the insinuation that Link, now that he's like 16, this is like every town he goes to, he's just like getting laid with everybody. But then the funny thing comes along because the magic healer is always the old woman with the cane. But the last town's flavor text for her is like, wow, wasn't that something special? That's my secret magic. And it's like, oh, Link, you dirty man. Anyway, Zelda 2, totally worth playing. Hell, play the game with save states. It's fine. If anyone has anything to say about that, if you say, hey, I finally beat Zelda 2, and like, oh, you use save states? I'm like, yeah, I did. Because who gives a shit? I beat the game. I saw the amazing curtain fall at the end of the game with the congratulations, you saved Hyrule again. press start to play again. Yeah, you earned it, whether it's save states or not. You did it. You can also cheat if you're really having difficulty, especially if you're emulating the game. If you own the original cart, remember, emulating has to be legal. But, you could activate Game Genie codes in this. I will say, however, and I learned this back when I was a kid, most of those codes, while they will work and do what they say they do, the game just freezes. It's almost like they knew to counter code people using these devices. So yeah, Zelda 2, worth it. Great game, incredibly frustrating, sometimes rage-inducing, but it is incredibly rewarding. And again, I kind of hate doing it, but it's Souls-like. It's not a Souls-like. Souls hasn't existed yet. But what I will say in that regard, if you like the challenge of Souls games, you will like the challenge of Zelda 2, because without a map, you have no idea where to go. You're not really, the hints are notoriously vague or mistranslated in this game, but the map that came with the original game had the names for the regions that you were going to. So if an NPC tells you, oh, this person in this desert stole my thing, if you didn't look at that map, you're not going to have any idea where that desert is, because no landmarks are named on the map, or when you get into them, with the exception of the towns. So if you really want to go crazy, you can play it without ever looking at that map and try to figure it out by just wandering and hoping for the best. But it's incredibly cryptic in that way, and the combat is equally unforgiving, where I would say, again, it's similar to that Dark Souls, where the average person who first plays a Souls game thinks it's unbelievably unfair. The combat's unforgiving. Just nothing about the game is fun. And that's because they go in with the mentality of, the game's going to help me do what I need to do, as opposed to you doing what you need to do. And that same philosophy started all the way back with this game. I actually would not be surprised to find out if Miyazaki was inspired by some of the late 80s, early 90s action RPGs and Zelda 2 to give it its cryptic meanings and figure it out yourself for combat and for exploring. And with that, I think it about wraps it up. Zelda 2, it doesn't suck. It's incredible. I love it. I've only beaten it twice, and that's fine. Still enjoy the hell out of the game. Give it a go.